The secret of the abandoned countryside house. In the heart of the countryside, far beyond the paved roads and distant from the restless noise of civilization, there stood a house that no one dared to approach. It wasn't merely old, it was abandoned in a way that seemed unnatural, as if time itself had refused to lay its hands upon it. The wooden walls, cracked and splintered, held an aura of secrets unspoken. The tall grass that surrounded it swayed like silent sentinels, as though guarding what was hidden within. Local villagers whispered about it in hushed tones, warning the younger ones never to wander close. Some claimed they had seen faint lights glowing from its upper window at night, though there had been no electricity for decades. Others swore that muffled cries of children could be heard if one lingered too long near the rusted iron gate. And then there were those who refused to say anything at all, merely shaking their heads and crossing themselves before changing the subject. The story begins with Daniel, a young man driven by an insatiable thirst for uncovering forgotten legends. His passion was recording abandoned places for his small but growing YouTube channel, where he investigated haunted sites and revealed their hidden histories. When Daniel first heard of the countryside house, he felt an undeniable pull. He believed that behind every myth, there was a kernel of truth waiting to be exposed. He ignored the villagers' warnings, dismissing them as mere superstitions meant to keep children in line. One chilly autumn afternoon, Daniel set out with his camera, backpack, and flashlight. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the fields in shades of blood orange and gold. The wind carried with it the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. As he walked along the dirt path leading to the house, a silence began to settle around him, unnatural, thick, as though the land itself were holding its breath. The closer he approached, the heavier the atmosphere became. His footsteps crunched against the gravel, echoing louder than they should have in such an open space. The gate appeared before him, twisted with rust, one hinge dangling precariously as if it hadn't held firm in years. Daniel pushed it open, the metallic groan sending shivers down his spine. Crossing into the property, he felt a sudden chill run across his skin. Though the air itself was still, he ignored it, convincing himself that fear was part of the thrill. The house loomed before him, its structure leaning slightly as though exhausted from decades of standing. Shutters dangled loose, and broken glass glimmered faintly in the last rays of sunlight. A crow perched on the roof cawed sharply before flying off into the twilight. Daniel began filming. His voice was steady, though inside his heart pounded with unease. He described the legends, the rumors, and the history he had managed to uncover. According to old records, the house once belonged to the Whitmore family, a wealthy couple with 2 young children who mysteriously disappeared one winter night. The house had been left untouched ever since. Some said the family had been murdered inside. Others whispered that they had simply vanished without a trace. What was undeniable, however, was that no one had lived there since, and every attempt to restore or demolish the house had failed due to inexplicable accidents. Daniel reached the front door. It was swollen with moisture, but when he touched it, the wood gave way easily, swinging open with a creak that seemed louder than thunder in the silence. Inside, darkness swallowed the light from his flashlight, as though the shadows themselves resisted being disturbed. Dust motes floated like spectral fragments in the air, and the scent of mildew mixed with something else, something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. He called out, partly to test the acoustics, partly to reassure himself. "Hello? Is anyone here?" The only reply was the echo of his own voice, warped as if repeated by something deeper within the house. And that was when he realized he was no longer alone. Daniel's flashlight beam swept across the hallway, illuminating faded wallpaper that peeled away in long, curling strips. Family portraits still hung on the walls, but the faces within them seemed distorted, as though time had warped the ink and paint into grotesque expressions. He stepped cautiously, his shoes crunching over broken glass and fragments of forgotten furniture. He entered what appeared to be the living room. An old piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed and cracked. A thick layer of dust coated everything, yet oddly, there were footprints leading across the floor, small, childlike, and recent. Daniel froze. His breath caught in his throat as he aimed the flashlight downward. The prints began near the fireplace and disappeared into the hallway. He steadied his voice for the camera. "It looks like someone's been here, or something." But the words felt hollow, meant more to comfort himself than to convince any future audience. Suddenly, the piano emitted a faint note, one single broken sound, as if a key had been pressed. Daniel swung his light toward it. The room was empty. His pulse quickened, his palms damp with sweat. He moved toward the instrument, each step deliberate, trying not to disturb whatever force lingered there. He touched a key. Silence. He pressed harder. Still silence. He let out a shaky laugh, blaming the sound on vibrations, or perhaps the wind. Yet deep down, he knew better. Leaving the living room, he followed the hallway deeper into the house. The air grew colder. His flashlight flickered, then steadied again. At the end of the hall, he found a door half open, leading into what had once been a child's bedroom. The wallpaper was decorated with faded images of stars and moons. A small bed, still neatly made, sat against the wall. Toys lay scattered across the floor, untouched for decades except for one. In the center of the room, a porcelain doll sat upright, staring directly at the door as though expecting him. Its eyes were wide and glassy, reflecting the beam of his flashlight. Daniel felt his stomach knot. Something about the doll was wrong. It was too clean, too untouched by time, as if someone had placed it there recently. The moment he stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind him with a violent crack. He spun around, gripping the handle, yanking it, but it wouldn't budge. His flashlight beam shook wildly as he pounded against the wood. Then came the sound. A soft giggle, childlike but distorted, echoing from all around him. The doll toppled over on its own, rolling slightly until it lay face down. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. He forced the door open at last, stumbling back into the hallway. The house was no longer silent. Now he could hear faint whispers like voices carried on the wind, murmuring words he couldn't understand. They grew louder with every step he took until they seemed to seep into his mind itself. Panic began to gnaw at him, yet his curiosity anchored him in place. He felt compelled to keep moving to uncover what the house was trying to reveal. He entered another room, the master bedroom. The bed was still made, though the sheets were stained dark. A wardrobe door creaked slowly open, though Daniel had not touched it. Inside hung tattered clothes, still swaying slightly as though disturbed by unseen hands. On the nightstand lay a journal, its leather cover cracked and brittle. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. The handwriting inside was delicate yet rushed, as if written in fear. The entries spoke of strange noises at night, of children claiming to see shadows in the corners of their rooms. The final entry ended abruptly. "They are here. We cannot hide anymore. God forgive us." Daniel's chest tightened as he read the words aloud for the camera. His voice quivered, no longer able to mask his fear. He set the journal down, backing away from the bed. The whispers had grown into something else now. Chants, layered voices repeating in a low, guttural tone that shook the walls. And then, just as suddenly, silence returned. Daniel turned to leave the room, but froze in horror. Standing in the doorway was a figure. The figure in the doorway stood impossibly still, its outline faint in the dim beam of Daniel's flashlight. At first it looked like the shadow of a man, tall and rigid, but as Daniel's light trembled across it, the figure's face came into focus, or rather, the absence of one. Its head was smooth, featureless like a hollow mask carved from the dark itself. Daniel's throat tightened, his breath refusing to escape. He stumbled backward, colliding with the bed frame, the camera still clutched tightly in his hand. The figure tilted its head ever so slightly, as though studying him. Then, without warning, it dissolved into the darkness, melting away before his eyes. Daniel's body screamed at him to flee, but his mind, the same mind that had driven him into this forsaken place, urged him to press forward. "If I leave now," he thought, "no one will ever believe what I saw." The need to capture proof, to show the world, outweighed the primal terror clawing at his chest. He forced his legs to move, retracing his steps down the hallway. The whispers returned, louder now, overlapping, as though dozens of unseen mouths were pressed against the walls. The air grew suffocating, thick with the stench of rot. Daniel covered his nose and mouth, gagging as he passed the staircase leading to the basement. The basement door hung ajar. A faint light, flickering unnatural, spilled out from the gap. Daniel hesitated, knowing that whatever secrets the house held were waiting below. His flashlight dimmed again, sputtering, as if warning him. He tightened his grip and descended the stairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, damp with an oppressive weight that pressed against his skin. The walls were lined with shelves of glass jars, each one filled with cloudy liquid and dark shapes floating within. Daniel brought the flashlight closer, his stomach turning as he realized what they contained. Animal remains, distorted and twisted, preserved in foul mixtures that smelled of chemicals and decay. At the far end of the basement, a table stood beneath the flickering light. Scattered across it were papers, sketches of symbols, and what looked like diagrams of human anatomy. Among them was a photograph, sepia-toned, old, yet disturbingly clear. It showed the Whitmore family smiling stiffly before the house. The father stood tall. The mother cradled a young girl, and a boy sat on a wooden chair between them. But the boy's eyes, they were scratched out, gouged away as if someone had violently tried to erase him from memory. Daniel's hands trembled as he lifted the photograph. On the back, written in faded ink, was a single phrase: "He is still here." A sudden crash echoed behind him. He spun around, flashlight shaking. One of the jars had fallen, shattering across the stone floor. The liquid seeped outward, releasing a stench that burned his nostrils. From the corner of his eye, Daniel caught movement, a shadow darting across the wall, impossibly fast. The chanting returned, deeper than before, reverberating in his bones. Daniel backed up against the table, his camera capturing every terrified breath. Something shifted in the darkness, a pair of small, pale hands gripping the edge of the shelf. Slowly, a child's face emerged from the shadows. It was the boy from the photograph. His skin was ashen, his eyes hollow voids. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Instead, the chanting grew louder, as though it was pouring from within him. Daniel stumbled toward the stairs, heart racing, but the boy appeared again at the top step, blocking his path. The movement was unnatural, jerking like a puppet on strings. Daniel screamed, swinging the flashlight wildly. The beam passed through the boy, scattering him like smoke, but the chanting persisted. Now it came from everywhere, rising in a deafening crescendo. The walls trembled. Dust fell from the ceiling. The house groaned as though alive. Daniel fled up the stairs, bursting back into the hallway, lungs burning. He didn't know where to go. Every door seemed to lead deeper into the nightmare. And then, from upstairs came the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Something else was waiting. The footsteps above echoed like the tolling of a death knell. Each creak of the wooden floorboards vibrated through the house, steady and patient, as if whatever was upstairs knew that Daniel had nowhere else to run. His flashlight flickered again, straining against the encroaching darkness. Summoning every ounce of courage, or perhaps reckless desperation, Daniel climbed the staircase. The air grew colder with every step, a frost seeping into his bones. His camera caught his ragged breathing, the panic in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into shadow. Doors lined both sides, all closed. At the far end stood one door slightly ajar, light seeping through the crack. Daniel approached slowly, his feet dragging across the creaking floor. As he neared the door, he heard it. A lullaby, soft and haunting, sung by a woman's voice. The melody was gentle, but beneath it lurked something dissonant, a wrongness that made Daniel's skin crawl. He pushed the door open. Inside was a nursery. Rocking chairs swayed gently though untouched, and a crib sat in the center of the room. The lullaby ceased abruptly. Silence pressed in, suffocating. Daniel stepped closer to the crib. His flashlight trembled as it revealed a bundle of blankets inside. He leaned over, pulling the fabric back. empty. Just blankets, arranged as though cradling something unseen. Suddenly, the rocking chair slammed to a halt. The air shifted, and in the reflection of the cracked mirror across the room, Daniel saw her. The mother. Her figure stood behind him in the mirror, pale and lifeless. Her eyes black voids, her mouth stretched in a grotesque smile. He spun around. Nothing. When he looked back at the mirror, she was closer, her face inches from his. Daniel screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over the crib. The blankets spilled onto the floor, but from within them a shrill cry erupted. A baby's wail, piercing, echoing, unnatural. The sound filled the entire house, shaking the walls, rattling the windows. Daniel clutched his ears, but the cry burrowed into his skull. The door slammed shut behind him. The room grew colder, his breath visible in the air. The rocking chairs began moving again, faster now, violently, as though driven by invisible hands. Daniel scrambled for the door, slamming his shoulder against it until it finally burst open. He tumbled into the hallway, gasping, the cries still echoing in his head. He fled blindly, not caring where he ended up, until he found himself in the attic staircase. He didn't remember choosing to go there. It was as if the house itself had guided him. The attic was suffocatingly hot, in contrast to the icy chill of the nursery. The smell of smoke lingered, acrid and suffocating. As he raised his flashlight, he saw charred beams and blackened walls. This was where the fire had started, the fire that had been covered up in the village's stories. In the center of the attic lay a circle of scorched symbols, drawn into the wooden floor. Inside the circle were the remains of candles, bones, and ash. Daniel realized with a jolt that this wasn't just a family tragedy. It had been a ritual. The Whitmore family hadn't merely disappeared, they had summoned something, and it was still here. The chanting returned once more, deafening, shaking the house as if it were alive. The shadows writhed along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes. From the circle of ash, something began to rise. It was massive, its form shifting and indistinct, as though the darkness itself had grown teeth and claws. Eyes opened within the void, dozens of them, all staring directly at Daniel. For the first time, Daniel felt true despair. Not fear, not panic, despair. The realization that he had trespassed into something far beyond his comprehension, something that should never have been disturbed. He dropped his camera, the device clattering against the floor. The last image it captured was Daniel's face, wide with horror, as the thing in the circle reached for him. The darkness surged forward, swallowing the attic in a suffocating wave. Daniel staggered backward, his flashlight slipping from his grasp and clattering uselessly across the floor. The chanting had become a roar, layered voices in impossible languages, vibrating through the beams of the house. The entity rising from the ritual circle was not bound by shape or logic. Its limbs elongated unnaturally, stretching like shadows against firelight. Dozens of hands clawed at the air, some skeletal, others fleshy, all twitching as if desperate to seize him. The dozens of eyes blinked in perfect unison, each reflecting Daniel's trembling body like fractured mirrors of his doom. He reached for the dropped camera in desperation, as though clinging to the idea that if he recorded it, he could make sense of it. His fingers brushed against the device, but a hand, cold and bony, clamped around his wrist. He screamed, yanking free, stumbling across the attic floor. The boards groaned beneath him, threatening to give way at any moment. The boy appeared again, silent, hollow-eyed, standing between Daniel and the exit. His small hand pointed toward the circle, commanding, accusing. Daniel's vision blurred with terror. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding louder than the chants. "I shouldn't be here," he gasped, though the words were swallowed by the noise. The shadows lashed out like whips, striking the walls, leaving scorch marks where they touched. The smell of burning wood filled the attic. Daniel darted toward the small window at the far end, shoving broken crates aside. He slammed his shoulder into the glass. It shattered, slicing into his skin, but adrenaline drove him forward. He crawled through, dragging himself onto the roof. Cold night air struck his face, a cruel contrast to the suffocating attic. The countryside stretched in silence, the village lights distant pinpricks. He crawled across the slanted roof. glass crunching beneath him. The house seemed to breathe beneath his palms, its shingles shifting, groaning, alive. Behind him, the attic window glowed with an unnatural red light. The chanting had grown louder still, shaking the very ground. A massive hand of shadow burst through the broken window, clawing at the roof, splintering wood. Daniel screamed, crawling faster, sliding toward the edge. For a moment, he thought he could escape. He imagined himself tumbling into the tall grass, sprinting down the dirt road, leaving the nightmare behind. But the house had other plans. The roof groaned, then cracked open beneath him. He plunged downward, crashing back into the attic, the broken boards spearing around him like jagged teeth. The entity towered above him now, fully emerged from the circle. Its presence pressed against his chest, crushing him without touch. Every whisper, every cry, every distorted giggle of the house poured into his ears until he thought his skull would split. The Whitmore family appeared around the circle, spectral, pale, their faces twisted by suffering. The mother's mouth stretched open, her lullaby returning, this time warped and agonizing. The father's eyes bled black tears, and the children reached out with skeletal hands. Daniel tried to crawl backward, but the shadows gripped his legs, dragging him toward the circle. His nails tore against the wood as he clawed for escape. His screams echoed, raw and primal, but the house devoured them. The last thing his camera recorded was his body being pulled into the mass of darkness, his face frozen in sheer terror. And then, blackness. The house fell silent once more. Outside, the countryside returned to its deceptive peace. The wind carried no screams, only the rustle of tall grass. To the villagers, nothing had changed. The abandoned house remained, its windows dark, its secrets preserved. But inside, another soul had been claimed. Days later, Daniel's car was found abandoned by the dirt path, his belongings still inside. The villagers whispered again, shaking their heads with weary certainty. They had warned him. They had warned all outsiders. The house was not to be disturbed. It was not a ruin. It was a prison, holding something that should never be unleashed. But the truth was more chilling. The house wasn't merely keeping something inside. It was feeding. Daniel's camera was discovered weeks later by a group of teenagers who dared each other to explore the edge of the property. They didn't enter the house. They didn't have the courage. But they found the shattered camera in the grass near the gate. When they played the footage back, they screamed and dropped the device, swearing never to return. The footage showed everything. The laughter, the whispers, the boy, the shadows, and Daniel's final moments. The last frame froze on his face, mouth open in a scream. Before the video cut to static, the camera circulated briefly online, clips appearing in hidden forums only to vanish mysteriously hours later. Some claimed the video itself was cursed, that those who watched it too many times heard whispers in their sleep or saw shadows moving in their homes. The countryside house remained. Decades turned into centuries and still it stood. Not because it was untouched by time, but because time refused to claim it. The house was a scar on the land, a wound that never healed. And every so often, when curiosity overcame fear, someone would enter. Some out of thrill-seeking, some out of desperation, some out of arrogance. None ever returned. The secret of the abandoned countryside house was not just its past, but its purpose. It was a beacon for the lost, a trap for the curious, a grave for the arrogant. It lured those who sought answers, feeding on their fear, devouring their souls, adding their voices to the eternal chorus that whispered through its halls. And so the legend lived on, carried by hushed voices, carved into the memories of those too afraid to speak aloud. The house waited patiently, knowing that one day, another Daniel would come, another soul to join the choir of the damned. The story of the abandoned countryside house is more than a tale of horror. It is a warning. Curiosity can be a gift, but when it blinds us to the dangers ahead, it becomes a curse. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Some secrets are not meant to be uncovered. The true terror lies not only in the supernatural, but in our own choices, our hunger for knowledge, our arrogance in believing we are safe from consequences. Perhaps the house is not evil on its own. Perhaps it is a mirror, reflecting back the darkness we carry inside. So the next time you hear a story of a place no one dares to go, ask yourself, would you enter? Would you ignore the warnings? And if you did, would you be ready to pay the price? Remember, not all mysteries should be solved. Some are meant to remain forever in the shadows. Thanks for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also turn on the notification bell to be notified of our posts. See you in the next video.